The sun rose slowly over the dusty town, painting the small wooden buildings in shades of gold and orange. In the heart of the market square, people gathered to sell and buy goods. Among them, two young sisters, the Apache sisters, stood quietly, their eyes scanning the crowd with both fear and hope. They were far from home, far from the land they loved and the family they had been separated from. The world around them was unfamiliar and harsh. The sisters held on to each other, feeling the strength in their bond as the only comfort in the cold, cruel reality of that day. The market was busy, full of people shouting prices and bartering over cattle, horses, and supplies. But today the sisters felt out of place, as if the world had forgotten their humanity. They were being treated not as people but as objects to be sold. The realization was painful. Each passing glance from the buyers reminded them of how powerless they were in this situation. They could only stand silently, their hands tightly clasped together, hearts racing and minds filled with memories of home. Nearby, a man watched quietly from the edge of the crowd. He was a rancher, living alone on a remote stretch of land where the wind swept across open fields and the mountains rose in the distance like silent guardians. Life on the ranch was simple, and he often enjoyed the peace it brought. But something about the scene at the market made him pause. He noticed the fear in the sisters' eyes, the tension in their posture, and the way they seemed to shrink under the gaze of strangers. He had always believed in helping those in need, and his heart ached at the sight of these young women being treated unfairly. The rancher approached cautiously, making sure not to startle the sisters. He could see the exhaustion on their faces, the weariness that came from being forced into such a situation. Their clothes were simple, worn, and dusty, yet there was a dignity in the way they carried themselves, a quiet strength that refused to be broken even in the face of such hardship. He could not walk away. Something inside him whispered that he had to do something, that he could not ignore their suffering. As he moved closer, he overheard the negotiations between the sellers and potential buyers. The sisters were being discussed in terms that made him uneasy. They were spoken about as though they were property, something to be traded for profit rather than people with feelings, dreams, and families. The rancher's heart sank. He felt a surge of determination. He would not allow these sisters to be treated this way. He would offer what he could to bring them to safety, to give them a chance to regain their freedom and dignity. The sisters sensed someone approaching but did not know what to expect. Their past experiences had taught them to be cautious, to hide their hopes behind walls of uncertainty. When the rancher spoke, his voice was calm, gentle, and free from judgment. He told them that he wanted to help, that he could provide a safe place where they could rest and recover. At first, the sisters were skeptical. How could a stranger promise safety when so many others had failed them? But there was something in his eyes, a sincerity that could not be ignored. They decided cautiously to trust him, if only for a moment. The negotiations were tense. The sellers were not used to someone offering help out of pure compassion. They wanted money, of course, as was expected in such a market. But the rancher was patient, firm, and fair. He made his offer, not out of greed, but out of a desire to protect the sisters. There was a moment of silence, a pause that seemed to stretch forever. Then finally the deal was accepted. The sisters had been bought not for profit but for their freedom. Relief washed over them, but it was mixed with uncertainty. They were free from the immediate danger, yes, but what awaited them on this ranch? Would it be another place of control? Another set of unknown rules and expectations? They clung to each other, whispering reassurances and sharing silent prayers. The rancher noticed their hesitation and spoke softly, telling them that they could take their time, that nothing would be forced upon them, and that they would have a place to call home, at least for now. The journey from the market to the ranch was quiet at first. The sisters rode in a wagon, their eyes wide with curiosity and caution. The landscape slowly changed from the crowded, noisy market to open fields and rolling hills. The wind carried the scent of grass and earth, and for the first time in days, the sisters felt a small measure of peace. The rancher guided the wagon steadily, making sure the ride was gentle and safe. He noticed the small signs of nervousness, the way their hands gripped the edges of the wagon, the occasional glance over the shoulder. But he also saw moments of wonder, as if they were beginning to realize that life could be more than fear and uncertainty. As they approached the ranch, the view expanded to show wide open spaces, animals grazing quietly, and a small house at the edge of a field. The sisters had never seen such a place, and it filled them with a mix of awe and hesitation. The rancher explained the simple routines of the ranch, emphasizing that there was no rush and no demand for immediate adaptation. He wanted them to feel safe and respected, not pressured or controlled. Slowly, the sisters began to relax, the tension in their bodies easing as they realized that this might truly be a place of refuge. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the sisters were allowed to rest in a small, comfortable room in the ranch house. It was modest but clean, with warm blankets and soft light. They sat quietly, reflecting on the day's events, their hearts still heavy with memories of fear but also buoyed by the first glimmers of hope. The rancher brought them food, speaking kindly and with patience, never forcing conversation but offering companionship and reassurance. They began to sense that this man, this stranger who had intervened in their lives, might be someone they could trust, someone who genuinely cared for their well-being. The night was calm, and for the first time in a long while, the sisters felt safe enough to sleep. The journey had been difficult, the market terrifying, and the unknown future daunting. Yet for the first time they felt a faint spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, they could begin to heal. The rancher, watching from a distance, felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. He knew the path ahead would not be simple or without challenges, but he also knew that offering safety, respect, and kindness was the first step toward a new life for the sisters. The bond between the sisters grew stronger as they whispered to each other in the quiet night, sharing fears and dreams alike. They began to imagine a future where they could regain their sense of self, their dignity, and the small joys that life had once held for them. The rancher, meanwhile, prepared for the days ahead, understanding that patience and empathy would be essential in helping them adjust. He had offered them freedom, but now the true work of trust and healing had only just begun. The stars twinkled above the ranch, silent witnesses to the beginning of a new chapter in the sisters' lives. Though the world had been cruel and unkind, here in this remote corner of the land there was a chance for safety, comfort, and a slow return to hope. The sisters did not know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time, they felt that they might finally be on a path that could lead them home, not just to a physical place, but to a sense of belonging and peace that they had long been denied. As the first part of their journey came to a close, the sisters drifted into a cautious sleep, hearts still tender but slowly opening to the possibility of trust. Outside, the rancher watched over them, silently promising to protect and guide them, to give them the time and space they needed to heal. In the quiet of the night, a small miracle had begun, a simple act of kindness that held the power to change lives, to restore hope, and to remind that even in a harsh world, compassion could make all the difference. The morning light spilled over the ranch, painting the fields in soft gold. Birds sang in the distance, and the gentle breeze carried the smell of fresh earth and grass. The Apache sisters awoke in the quiet room, feeling a mixture of hope and uncertainty. The events of the previous day played in their minds, the fear at the market, the sudden kindness of the rancher, and the long wagon ride to this unfamiliar place. Slowly, they realized that they were no longer in danger, and for the first time in weeks they could breathe without constant worry. The rancher was already up, tending to the animals and the morning chores. He moved quietly, aware of the sisters' presence but giving them space to gather their strength. When they finally appeared in the kitchen, he greeted them with a warm smile and simple words. "Good morning. Breakfast is ready when you are." There was no hurry, no pressure, only the quiet offer of care. The sisters exchanged glances, hesitant but comforted. Sitting down at the small wooden table, they began to eat, noticing for the first time that the food was warm, nourishing, and given with kindness rather than as a transaction. After breakfast, the rancher invited them to walk outside, to see the land around the ranch. The sisters hesitated at first, unsure of what to expect. The open field seemed endless, stretching to the distant mountains, dotted with grazing animals. For a moment they felt a sense of awe, a freedom they had not known for a long time. The air was crisp and clean, unlike the crowded, dusty market. The sisters walked slowly, taking in the sights and sounds, and began to feel a small but growing sense of peace. The rancher showed them around, introducing them to the animals, explaining the routines of the day, and answering their questions patiently. The sisters were cautious, but curiosity began to replace fear. They watched the horses graze, marveled at the gentle movements of the cows, and even laughed softly at the playful antics of the barn cats. Each small moment of joy, each tiny discovery helped them realize that life could be different from what they had endured. Here there was safety, kindness, and respect, a combination they had long thought impossible. As the days passed, the sisters began to settle into the rhythm of ranch life. They were not forced to do anything they did not want to do. The rancher respected their boundaries, allowing them to choose what chores to take on and giving them time to adjust. Slowly, they started helping with small tasks, feeding the chickens, collecting eggs, and watering the plants. Each accomplishment, no matter how minor it seemed, gave them a sense of independence and confidence. They were learning to trust again, learning that the world could offer care instead of cruelty. The sisters also began to speak more openly, sharing stories of their childhood, their family, and their home. The rancher listened carefully, never interrupting, always showing respect for their experiences. They spoke of traditions, songs, and the places that had once been safe and familiar. Sometimes tears came, sometimes laughter, and always a sense of connection. In those moments, the sisters began to feel seen and heard in a way they had not in a long time. The rancher's gentle attention reminded them that kindness could be a lifeline, and that people could be trusted again. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with shades of orange and pink, the sisters sat by a small pond near the edge of the ranch. They watched the reflection of the sky in the water, feeling a sense of calm that had been absent for too long. The rancher joined them quietly, sitting a few steps away. He did not force conversation, but his presence was comforting. The sisters spoke softly about their dreams, about a future that once seemed impossible. They imagined a life where they could be free to make choices, to laugh without fear, and to live with dignity. Over time, small routines formed, creating a sense of stability and safety. The sisters began to help with the daily work around the ranch not out of obligation, but because they found satisfaction in contributing and seeing the results of their efforts. They learned to ride the horses, care for the animals, and even plant a small garden. Each new skill brought confidence, and each day strengthened the trust between them and the rancher. He continued to treat them with respect, never demanding more than they could give and always allowing space for their feelings and decisions. The bond between the sisters grew stronger as they shared this new life. They comforted each other, encouraged each other, and celebrated small victories together. Nights were spent talking quietly in their room, sharing fears and hopes alike. For the first time, they allowed themselves to imagine a future beyond fear, a life that could be filled with small joys, laughter, and security. They began to understand that healing was possible, that even after hardship, life could offer moments of happiness and peace. As weeks turned into months, the sisters grew more comfortable with the idea of home. They began to see the ranch not just as a place of refuge, but as a place where they could belong. The land, animals, and the gentle presence of the rancher all became familiar and comforting. The sisters explored the fields freely, learning to move with confidence and curiosity. They sang songs from their childhood, taught each other new skills, and even started to feel a sense of pride in their accomplishments. Life, once so uncertain and harsh, now held promise and possibility. The rancher continued to guide them with patience, never rushing or pushing, but always encouraging growth and independence. He spoke often of respect, kindness, and the value of every person. The sisters absorbed these lessons slowly, allowing themselves to believe that the world could hold goodness, even after the darkness they had endured. They laughed more freely, slept more soundly, and began to trust in the simple routines of daily life. Each day brought a small victory, each smile a sign of healing. One bright morning, the rancher spoke softly to the sisters, suggesting they take a short journey around the property. As they walked together, the sisters realized how much they had grown in courage and confidence. The land no longer seemed intimidating, the animals no longer frightening, and the tasks once unfamiliar now brought a sense of accomplishment. They felt a quiet strength within themselves, a feeling that they could face challenges with resilience and hope. At the end of their walk, the rancher stopped and turned to them. With a gentle smile, he said, "Let's go home." The words carried weight far beyond their simple meaning. For the sisters, it was more than just a physical place. It was a declaration of safety, belonging, and a return to dignity. They understood that home was not just where one sleeps, but where one feels valued, respected, and free. The sisters felt a wave of emotion, relief, gratitude, and hope all mixed together. For the first time in a long while, they felt truly safe. That evening, the sisters returned to the ranch house, hearts light and spirits lifted. They shared a quiet meal, reflecting on how far they had come and the new possibilities that lay ahead. They no longer felt trapped by fear or uncertainty. Instead, they embraced the routines, the open fields, and the gentle presence of the rancher as a new chapter in their lives. Laughter came easily, and smiles were no longer forced but genuine expressions of renewed joy. As the stars appeared in the sky, the sisters sat outside looking at the constellations and feeling the cool night breeze. They spoke softly about their dreams, about the life they hoped to build, and about the gratitude they felt for this unexpected chance. The rancher watched nearby, silently proud of their progress and the courage they had shown. He understood that his role was not to control, but to guide, protect, and provide a foundation of safety from which they could grow. Over time, the sisters began to take ownership of their lives in small but meaningful ways. They cared for the animals, maintained the garden, and even helped the rancher with planning tasks. Each action strengthened their confidence and reinforced the sense of belonging they had found. The once lonely and frightened sisters were now beginning to embrace a life filled with routine, purpose, and the freedom to make their own choices. The ranch became more than a refuge, it became a home, a place where trust and compassion flourished. The sisters often reflected on their journey, remembering the fear and uncertainty of the market, the shock of being treated as less than human, and the kindness of the rancher who had changed their lives. They realized that healing was a gradual process, one that required patience, courage, and the gentle support of someone who truly cared. With each passing day, they felt stronger, more hopeful, and more capable of facing the world with dignity and resilience. In the quiet moments of the evening, the sisters would sometimes sit together and hold hands, sharing stories, dreams, and gratitude. They laughed more freely, slept more peacefully, and began to trust in the goodness of life again. The rancher, watching over them with quiet pride, knew that the greatest gift he could give was not just a safe place, but the opportunity for them to rebuild their sense of self, to regain confidence, and to experience the warmth of genuine care and respect.